My name is Briana Patterson. I'm 23 years old, and for 23 years I lived as a servant in my own home. Every morning, I woke up at 5. Not because I had a job, not because I had school, because my family expected breakfast to be ready before anyone else woke up. I cleaned the floors. I washed the clothes. I cooked the meals. I polished the silver. I carried groceries. And when my brother Brandon wanted something, I was expected to get it. Brandon slept until noon whenever he wanted. He had a bedroom bigger than my entire living space. He went to private school. He drove a BMW. He had expensive clothes, expensive friends, expensive vacations, and parents who treated every one of his dreams like an emergency. I had a basement, a mattress, 3 dresses, and a list of rules. My parents had told me the same thing for as long as I could remember. Some children are born to be served. Some children are born to serve. You're the second kind, Briana. For most of my life, I believed them, until the morning of my brother's wedding. Because that morning, a man I'd never met looked at my face for less than 10 seconds, and suddenly couldn't breathe. His name was Richard Whitmore. He was the father of the woman my brother was about to marry. He was wealthy, powerful, and respected. The kind of man people moved aside for when he entered a room. But when he saw me carrying a silver tray through the rehearsal dinner, he didn't look at the tray. He looked at me. And then he asked me something that made my entire childhood suddenly feel like a lie. He said, "Briana, do you know who your real mother is?" I didn't know what to say, because I'd spent 23 years believing I already knew. I thought Donna Patterson was my mother. I thought Gerald Patterson was my father. I thought Brandon was my brother. I thought I knew exactly where I belonged. I was wrong. And within the next 24 hours, I was going to discover why my parents had hidden me from the world. But before I tell you what Richard Whitmore discovered, you need to understand what my life had actually been like. Because the truth didn't begin at the wedding. It began 23 years earlier, in a house in Fairfield County, Connecticut. From the outside, the Patterson home looked perfect. 2 stories, white colonial siding, black shutters, a manicured lawn, a driveway that always had at least 2 expensive cars parked in it. Our neighbors were doctors, attorneys, executives, and hedge fund managers. Everyone thought my family was living the American dream. But nobody saw the basement. That was where I slept. The room had concrete floors, no windows, a small utility sink, a furnace that rattled through the night, and a thin mattress pushed against one wall. There was no closet. My clothes were kept inside 2 plastic storage bins. I had one small mirror above the sink. The glass was cracked diagonally across the middle. I used to stand in front of it every night and study my face. Because even as a little girl, I knew I looked different. Brandon had sandy brown hair. So did Gerald. Donna had light brown eyes. So did Brandon. I had dark chestnut hair. And green eyes. Not brown. Not hazel. Green. When I was young, I thought maybe it was something special. One afternoon when I was about 7, I asked Donna about it. "Mrs. Patterson?" She looked up from her magazine. "What?" "Why don't my eyes look like yours?" Her face changed immediately. Not anger. Something colder. "Don't ask stupid questions." I lowered my head. "Sorry." She went back to reading. That was the first time I learned something important. Questions were dangerous. The more questions I asked, the more trouble I got into. So I stopped asking, at least out loud. Every morning, my alarm went off at 5 o'clock. 5 minutes later, I was upstairs. The kitchen had to be spotless before Gerald came downstairs. The marble counters had to shine. The coffee had to be exactly the way he liked it. The eggs couldn't be overcooked. The toast couldn't be too dark. And if I made a mistake, I heard about it. Gerald would walk into the kitchen around 7. He usually carried the Wall Street Journal under one arm. He'd sit in his leather chair. And without looking at me, he'd say, "Coffee." I'd place the cup beside him. Then he'd take one sip. Sometimes he said nothing. Sometimes he said, "Too weak." And I'd make another. That was our relationship. He never called me daughter. I never called him dad. I was required to call him Mr. Patterson. Donna was Mrs. Patterson. Those weren't nicknames. They were rules. Gerald had written them down years earlier. 4 rules. They were taped to the inside of my basement door. Rule 1. You do not sit at the family table. Rule 2. You do not call us mom or dad. Rule 3. You do not leave the house without permission. Rule 4. You do not speak to strangers. I knew those rules better than I knew my own birthday, because breaking them had consequences. Brandon never had to follow them. He could come home at midnight. He could invite friends over. He could leave dirty dishes on the floor. He could yell at our parents. He could spend hundreds of dollars on shoes. Nobody cared. But if I forgot to polish the silver, I was reminded of my place. When Brandon turned 18, Gerald bought him a white BMW. I remember standing in the driveway when the car arrived. The sun was reflecting off the hood. Brandon walked around it with a huge smile. Donna hugged him. Gerald handed him the keys. It's yours. I stood several feet away. Nobody noticed me. That night, Brandon drove his friends around town. I stayed home washing his dishes. I was used to it. What I wasn't used to was wondering why. When I was 12, I finally asked about school. I want to go to school too.
Donna looked at me.
You're homeschooled, but Brandon goes to school. Brandon needs it. What do I need? She stared at me for several seconds. Then she said, you need to learn your responsibilities. That was all. No school, no friends, no driver's license.
No identification.
No normal childhood, just chores. Then, when I was 16, I tried to leave. I'd been saving grocery change for months. $17.32. It wasn't enough to build a new life. But I thought it might be enough to get me somewhere safe. One afternoon, I waited until everyone was distracted. I put on my oldest jacket. I walked out the back door. Then I walked 3 miles. I reached the bus station. I remember standing there with my $17 in my pocket, thinking that maybe my life was finally beginning. It lasted less than 2 hours. The police found me. They brought me home. Gerald stood at the front door. He looked worried, concerned, almost like a loving father. One of the officers said, she doesn't have any identification. Gerald sighed. We've had problems with her for years. Then he looked at me. She's confused. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. The officer left. Gerald locked the door. Then he leaned close to me. His voice was quiet. Without papers, you don't exist. I didn't understand what he meant. He continued, and if nobody knows who you are, nobody will believe you. That sentence stayed with me. For 7 years. I stopped trying to escape. I stopped asking questions. I stopped believing there was anything outside those walls for me. Then Brandon got engaged. His fiancée was Victoria Whitmore. And suddenly my family became obsessed with one thing: money, status. The Whitmore name. Richard Whitmore owned Whitmore Properties. His company had millions in assets. Brandon's engagement to Victoria wasn't just a marriage to my parents. It was an opportunity. I heard Gerald talking one night. This changes everything. Donna asked, what do you mean? The Whitmores could open doors for Brandon.
Donna laughed.
Imagine where he'll be in 5 years. Neither of them mentioned me. They never did. The wedding was going to be enormous. 200 guests. The Ritz-Carlton. A live orchestra. A 5-tier wedding cake. Flowers imported for the ceremony. A reception that cost more than anything I'd ever owned. Richard Whitmore was paying for most of it. And my parents wanted everything perfect, including me. Except they didn't want me visible. 3 weeks before the wedding, Donna called me into the kitchen. She sat across from me. We need to discuss your role. For a moment, I was excited. I thought she was finally going to say something I'd spent my entire life waiting to hear. Maybe she wanted me to be a bridesmaid. Maybe she had finally decided I was family. I asked, am I walking with the bridesmaids?
Donna laughed. No.
My smile disappeared. You'll be helping with service.
I served her.
Service. You'll pass champagne. Help the catering staff. Make sure guests have what they need. You want me to work the wedding? Don't call it work. She smiled. It's helping. Then she leaned closer. You know how you are, Briana. I didn't answer. Clumsy.
She paused.
Awkward. Another pause. If you stood beside Brandon in front of the Whitmores, people might start asking questions. What questions? Her expression hardened. Don't make this about you. That sentence was familiar. Everything was always allowed to be about Brandon. Never me. The rehearsal dinner was held at Greenwich Country Club. That night, I wore a simple black dress, with a white apron. Donna had chosen it. Before I left the house, she adjusted my collar. Smile. I nodded. Don't speak unless spoken to. I nodded again. And stay invisible. Yes, Mrs. Patterson. Then we arrived. The place looked like another world. Crystal glasses. White tablecloths. Soft music. People wearing watches that cost more than my parents' first house. I carried champagne through the room. Nobody knew my name. Nobody cared. Until Victoria approached me. She was beautiful, confident, and surprisingly kind. She looked at me. You're Brandon's sister, right? My hand tightened around the tray. Yes, ma'am. Why aren't you sitting with the family? Before I could answer, Donna appeared. Oh, Briana prefers helping. She laughed. She's shy. Victoria looked confused. But before she could say anything else, someone behind her spoke. Briana? I turned. Richard Whitmore was standing near the balcony. He was holding a glass in one hand, but he wasn't drinking. He was staring at me. His face had gone completely pale. He walked toward me slowly. One step, then another. He stopped about 3 feet away. His eyes moved across my face, my hair, my eyes, the shape of my jaw. Then he whispered, What's your full name? Briana Patterson. His expression changed. Patterson. Yes, sir. He looked at Donna, then back at me. His voice became unsteady. Do you know who your birth mother is? I felt the room disappear. For the first time in my life, someone had asked the question I'd been too afraid to ask myself. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Richard Whitmore stepped backward. He looked like he'd just seen a ghost. Then he reached into his jacket,
Pulled out his phone.
and walked outside. Donna watched him leave. Her champagne glass trembled in her hand. And, for the first time in 23 years, I saw fear on my mother's face. Not anger. Not irritation.
Fear. I didn't understand it then.
But Richard Whitmore had just recognized something about me. Something my parents had spent my entire life hiding. And before sunrise the next morning, he was going to find the answer. The answer that would change my name, my family, and my entire understanding of who I really was. Richard Whitmore walked outside. I stood there with the champagne tray still in my hands. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Then Donna grabbed my arm. Come with me. She pulled me into a quiet hallway. What did he ask you? I looked at her. Why? Her face tightened. Just answer me. He asked who my birth mother was. The color disappeared from her face. You tell him nothing. I don't know anything. You don't need to know anything. She walked away. But now I needed answers. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. For the first time, I didn't start cleaning. I sat on my mattress and stared at the cracked mirror. Richard's question kept repeating in my head. Who is your birth mother? At 7:14 a.m., someone knocked on the basement door. I expected Gerald. Instead, it was Victoria. She stepped inside and looked around. Her eyes moved from the mattress to the concrete floor. This is where you sleep? I nodded. She looked horrified. Why? I didn't answer. She already knew. Then she handed me a small envelope. My father asked me to give you this. Inside was an old photograph. A young woman was holding a baby. I stared at the woman's face. I had never seen her before, but something about her felt familiar. Then I noticed the baby. Green eyes, dark hair, a tiny birthmark near the left ear. The same birthmark I'd had my entire life. My hands started shaking. Who is she?
Victoria whispered.
My father thinks she's your mother. Before I could say anything, footsteps came down the stairs. Gerald. He saw the photograph. His face changed instantly. Where did you get that? I stood up. Who is she? Give it to me.
No.
For the first time in my life, I said no without apologizing. Gerald stepped toward me. Then Richard Whitmore's voice came from behind him. Don't touch her. Gerald turned. Richard was standing at the bottom of the stairs. Beside him was an attorney, and behind them was Donna. She looked terrified. Richard held another folder. I spent the night confirming what I suspected. Gerald said nothing. Richard looked at me. Briana, your birth name wasn't Patterson. My heart stopped. What? He opened the folder. Your birth name was Briana Whitmore. The room went silent. I stared at him. Whitmore. Richard nodded. You were my sister's daughter. I couldn't breathe. He continued. My sister, Elizabeth, died 23 years ago. I looked at the photograph again. The woman holding the baby. Elizabeth, my biological mother. Richard explained that Elizabeth had been in a custody dispute shortly before her death. Donna and Gerald had been close family friends. They claimed they could care for me temporarily. But after Elizabeth died, they disappeared with me. They never completed the legal adoption. Instead, they erased my identity. They told everyone I was their daughter. And when questions became dangerous, they hid me, my missing birth certificate, my lack of school records, my lack of identification. Suddenly everything made sense. Gerald wasn't protecting me. He was protecting the secret. Richard looked at him. You didn't raise her. Gerald's voice shook. We gave her a home. Richard's expression hardened. You made her your servant. Donna started crying. We didn't know what else to do. I looked at her. You knew. She couldn't answer. You knew who my mother was. Silence. Then Donna whispered, yes. That one word destroyed the last piece of the childhood I'd believed in. I wasn't unwanted. I wasn't born to serve. I wasn't the second kind of child. I had simply been stolen from my own identity. Richard handed me another document. This is your original birth record. My name was there. Briana Elizabeth Whitmore. My mother's name. My father's name. My real identity. For 23 years, I'd been looking at myself in a cracked mirror wondering why I didn't belong. Now, I finally understood. I had never belonged to the Pattersons. They had made me believe I did. Richard then revealed something else. Elizabeth had left an inheritance for her child. A trust. Property. Investments. Money that had been protected until I turned 23. Gerald and Donna had known about it. That was why they kept me. Not because they loved me. Because they believed they could control the inheritance. Richard looked at the attorney. Tell her. The attorney opened the folder. Briana, the trust is worth approximately $12 million. My knees almost gave out. $12 million. The money didn't matter. Not really. What mattered was knowing why I'd been hidden. What mattered was finally knowing that the little girl in the basement had never been worthless. She had been somebody's daughter. Somebody's family. Somebody worth protecting. I turned toward Donna. Why didn't you ever tell me?
She cried.
We were afraid. Afraid of what? That you'd leave. I laughed once. Not because it was funny. Because it was unbelievable. You were afraid I'd leave? I looked around the basement. You made me want to. Gerald tried to interrupt. Briana, we made mistakes.
No.
I shook my head. You made choices. That sentence silenced him. Then Brandon appeared at the doorway. He had heard everything.
He looked at me.
Then at his parents. Is this true? Nobody answered. Brandon's face fell. You knew. Donna covered her face. He stepped backward. For the first time, Brandon looked at me differently. Not like furniture. Not like a housekeeper. Like a person. My sister. I stopped him. You don't get to call me that now.
He looked down.
I didn't know. I know. And that was the strange part. Brandon had never been the one who created the rules. He had simply benefited from them. But benefiting from cruelty didn't make someone innocent. Richard stepped forward. The wedding continues. Everyone stared at him. Victoria looked confused. Richard looked at his daughter. Victoria, you don't have to marry into this family. Brandon immediately said, I understand. Victoria looked at him. I need time. Then she walked toward me. She took my hand. You should have been standing beside us today. I shook my head.
No.
She looked confused. I don't want to stand beside people who never wanted me. Then I removed the white apron I'd been wearing. I placed it on the floor. For 23 years, that apron had represented my place. The servant. The invisible daughter. The person who existed to make everyone else's life easier. I walked away from it. Richard opened the ballroom doors. 200 guests were waiting. The music stopped. Everyone turned. I walked in beside Richard. Donna and Gerald followed behind us. Richard stood in front of everyone. There has been a misunderstanding about someone in this family. He looked at me. This is Briana Elizabeth Whitmore. Whispers spread through the ballroom. She is my niece. I could hear people breathing. Richard continued. For 23 years, she was denied her identity, education, freedom, and family. Gerald looked at the floor. Donna was crying. Richard didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The truth is enough. Then he turned to me. You don't owe anyone here forgiveness. I looked at Donna. Then Gerald. Then Brandon. Then Victoria. I know. Richard smiled faintly. What do you want? I thought about the basement, the rules, the cane, the bus station, the birthday parties I never had, the schools I never attended, the years that couldn't be returned. Then I answered, I want my life back. And that's exactly what I did. I moved out that week. I enrolled in college. I got my identification. I opened my own bank account. I learned how to drive. I bought my first apartment. Not because I needed the inheritance, because I wanted something that belonged entirely to me. Richard helped me recover my mother's belongings. Among them was a small handwritten letter. It had been written shortly before Elizabeth died. The letter said, If my daughter ever reads this, I hope she knows one thing. She was wanted, she was loved, and she was never meant to live in fear. I read it 3 times. Then I cried. Not the way I'd cried in the basement. These were different tears. They weren't tears of fear. They were tears of finally being seen. Months later, I returned to Fairfield County. I stood outside the old Patterson house. The basement window was still there. For a moment, I remembered the girl I'd been. Then I smiled, because she had survived. I didn't go inside. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to destroy them. They had already lost the one thing they cared about most.
Control over me.
I walked back to my car. Before leaving, I looked at the house one last time, and I whispered, You were never my home. Then I drove away. Today, I still have contact with Victoria. Richard became the first person in my biological family to call me his niece. And Brandon eventually apologized. I accepted the apology, but I didn't go back. Because forgiveness doesn't mean returning to the place that broke you. Sometimes forgiveness means walking away without carrying the anger with you. I spent 23 years believing I was born to serve. Now I know the truth. No child is born to be someone's servant. No child deserves to be hidden. And no family has the right to convince a person that they are worthless simply because the truth is inconvenient. My name is Briana Elizabeth Whitmore. For 23 years, they told me I didn't belong. It took one stranger looking into my eyes to remind me that I always did. And if there's one thing I've learned from everything that happened, it's this. Never let someone else's treatment of you become your definition of yourself. Because sometimes, the person they tried hardest to erase is the person who is always meant to be remembered.